What is up, my trunk slaying friends? That's right, I have hats now. How are you doing? Happy Thursday. Today, I wanted to talk a little bit about outsourcing. Specifically, I wanted to talk a little bit about offshore outsourcing and some strategies that I think can make it a little more successful. To give you guys a little more background, this is, like many of my videos, an extension of a lot of Reddit posts I see around MSPs who are struggling to figure out how they can make offshore outsourcing work. And I think I can bring a unique perspective to this because not only did I very successfully leverage offshore outsourcing at my MSPs, I now work for an onshore outsourcing firm, and I think that hopefully will give me some credibility here. The other day, Jason Slagle and Kyle Christensen did a really interesting live stream about some of the security and technical concerns with working with offshore people. And I will link to that. You should absolutely give it a watch because they cover topics that I am in no way qualified to speak on. And it is really, really important and useful information you should think about, assuming you heed the advice that I give you in this video. So before we get too much further, I think there's really two main categories of outsourcing that we should cover, and one I'm really going to focus on in this video. So there's the type of outsourcing, whether it's onshore or offshore, that companies like Helped do, IT by Design, Mission Control, GMS. I mean, there's tons of them, and pretty much every single one of them is really, really, really good at what they do. As for those that don't know, I used IT by Design for years at my MSP. I was a huge fan of IT by Design. I think they're fantastic. Helped is fantastic. We have a slightly different model, but that methodology really avoids a lot of the pitfalls that we're going to talk about, because you're paying someone else to basically manage this team for you. And there's advantages and disadvantages to that. And we'll talk about that on another video. So for the time being, let's assume that you already know that fully managed outsourcing is awesome, and that's not why you're here today. You want to do this yourself. You want to hire somebody directly, or 1099 someone directly at your MSP that lives in another country, and you're struggling with the concept and how this is going to work. So we're going to talk about that. So this post that I responded to the other day, which I think really the poster summarized, I think, the challenge point that a lot of MSPs, small and large, and I really don't think this is an MSP size or maturity issue, have with direct employment or contracted employment, or even using like Fiverr or Upwork to somehow manage their own offshore staff. And to be clear, and if you don't want to watch the whole video, if you can figure out how to do this properly, hiring people in other time zones from other cultures can really be an awesome experience. And everyone that I know that's done it right freaking loves it, because it's the coolest thing ever. You have amazing coverage, you can get fantastic talent and interesting people, and it just makes your company immediately seem bigger and more global. So if all you needed was a push to go try it out, go try it out. But if you've thought more about it than that, and you're sort of in that phase where you just, I can't fathom it, I'm going to read one of the summarized pain points the poster makes. I think it summarizes a lot of the issues that people feel they're going to experience. So this poster said, we're talking about people who are often less skilled, working at night, verbal communication barriers. And then they were saying that they felt the draw was that you're paying much less to hire these people, and that you likely feel good about it because they're making good money for where they are. And specifically, this conversation was about hiring people in the Philippines. But I think a lot of this argument applies to hiring anybody from any of the common offshore countries that we hire from. And at face value, I think we've all thought that, right? Like it's going to be inexpensive, less skilled labor that is happy to have the job and will just do the work for me when it's nighttime for me. And none of that is necessarily untrue, but I think when you approach it with that mindset, it's a very reductive mindset that will cause you to approach the entire relationship the wrong way. It'll cause you to approach the relationship with your offshore help the exact same way that an MSP client who's looking to buy the lowest price used desktops from us would approach an MSP. And that's they're completely missing the point of the value prop of what the MSP does. And we probably won't get along with that client. Same thing's going to happen if you approach your offshore employee that way. Since this particular post was about the Philippines, I'm going to talk a little more about the Philippines. But a lot of this applies to really any of these countries that we're hiring from. And I do want to mention a quick point that I think is ultimately the biggest stumbling block why direct hire offshore doesn't immediately just work given every other factor. When you are hiring somebody offshore, you need to think about the culture of the country they come from. And when I say culture of the country they come from, I'm not talking about language, sports teams, movies, what they eat, holidays. That stuff's all important. We'll talk about that in a minute. But what I mean is you need to think about how we've been programmed in Western countries to have a sense that the value of the individual is just as important, if not more important, than the value of the whole. It is a cornerstone of almost all Western culture that your individual opinions, desires, thoughts, and decision making are equally weighted with the whole. Many Eastern cultures, and that does tend to be where a lot of our offshore employees come from, that's not really a long-standing cultural cornerstone in many Eastern cultures. In many Eastern cultures, there's this idea that you are part of something bigger. That could be your family, that could be your town, whatever it is. There's a little less sense sometimes of nationalism and more of this sense that my individual wants and needs and decision making are not greater than the whole. And I should be deferent to my peers, my superiors, and my elders. And you might be saying, well, yeah, I understand that. Like everybody knows that. But that plays a massively important role in how people process information in your MSP. And all other factors we're going to talk about aside, if you have a process that is not perfect, and I'm here to tell you, your processes are not perfect. They might be good, but they're not perfect. When they break or do not fit, we all rely on somebody to make a decision in the absence of information or direction. That generally is a promoted behavior in Western culture. That is generally a demoted behavior in Eastern culture. So that typically tends to be the biggest stumbling block I think most of us find when we go to hire somebody outsourced from an Eastern culture and we set them to a task and they reach that point in the task where the instructions don't fit perfectly and they tend to stop and escalate or ask for help. And we look at it like, why aren't you just doing this? Or why didn't you just do that? Or just make a decision? And we get frustrated with them. That is why that happens. And I just want everybody to know and understand that when you're looking to hire that person, you just want to make sure that whatever your process maturity is and how much you rely on individual decision making, which I think is higher than you might be estimating, you are going to run into that when hiring somebody from a non-Western culture. That's not their fault. That's literally how they've been raised, and that's a part of how they live their life. Just the same way that it's not your fault. And in fact, in some Eastern cultures, they will hire us to be the loud, brash American in the room because it's not our fault that we're so opinionated and outspoken. It's how we've been raised. So just be aware of that when you go into this. All right, so getting back to those core points about offshoring in the Philippines, where this person had said that you're hiring a less skilled person, they're going to work at night, there are verbal communication barriers, and you pay these people very little and you make yourself feel better about doing that because you're saying, well, that's a lot of money for them. And the response I gave there, and what I want to talk about here is, well, I don't think at face value any of that is an unfair assessment. It's the wrong assessment and it's the wrong approach, and it's likely why this poster didn't have a lot of success and why other people haven't had a lot of success with hiring folks in the Philippines and similar countries. So the first thing you really need to understand is you're not hiring less skilled people. I understand that in some areas there is more of an academic diploma mill culture, and people will have 40 or 50 certs that we all know they have zero capability to back up. It's like, yeah, I acknowledge that. But my point is, why would you hire that person? You should hire somebody that has the necessary experience and skill set to perform the role. You're adding somebody to your team. It just so happens they're on the other side of Earth from you. It doesn't mean that you're going in and adding a lesser person. You wouldn't hire a low-skilled person here. Why would you hire a low-skilled person there? There are plenty of people in other countries that have all of the same experience and skill set that we want on our onshore team. So that's the first thing, is you really don't want to hire people that are less skilled. You still want to have that same, level that you're using, a couple years experience in a managed help desk setting, the same basic certifications you would expect, not the crazy ones that we know that they just, diploma milled. So that's the first thing. Second thing is this idea that working at night. You got to remember, and this happens a lot even at companies that span the United States, you have to remember your own time zone blindness. It's like, I'm on the East Coast. My former MSP, while very big, East Coast. It's easy to forget that the rest of the Earth doesn't exist on the East Coast time zone. So while it might be nighttime for me, it doesn't mean it's nighttime for them. And I think that's important to remember, that this very likely could be a day job. This could be second shift, third shift. This could be them starting at 4 a.m. It doesn't mean that they're working at night. And so don't put that prejudice and that bias we tend to have in this country on third shift workers. We tend to sort of look at that as when I say that, as a very like blue collar term that is almost negative, and it's silly. Why? I mean, stuff needs getting done all around the clock. So not only should you not look at third shift workers in a negative way, because third shift workers are incredibly important to the economy and to keeping everything running, but the people you're hiring aren't working third shift. It's the daytime for them. So keep that in mind. So that moves us on to the verbal communication barrier issue. And I think this one is interesting because most of the primary countries that we tend to hire offshore from, and in this case, the Philippines, English is one of their official languages, guys. Like, everybody know that? Like, same thing in India. English is one of their official languages. Most of these people have grown up from, if not childhood, at least primary school, fluently speaking English. And if you're worried about the type of English they speak, and this is why we were talking about the Philippines in this post, well, the Philippines speaks Americanized English. I mean, I don't want to be politically incorrect, but in a lot of ways, the Philippines is kind of a proxy culture colony of the United States. They have McDonald's there. They have Coca-Cola there. They watch our movies. They wear our clothes and our brands. It's very Americanized. So there might be sometimes slight accents for sure. Of course, there's accents. Not everybody on Earth is from wherever you're from in the United States. But if you're worried about these team members being able to speak Americanized English clearly, succinctly, with the idiosyncrasies and nuances that we expect a native speaker to have, well, there you go. They've got them all. They know all our idioms, the jokes, the slang, the sarcasm. That really shouldn't be an issue. So the next point then being that you pay much less, and this is the telling one. So yes, but no. MSPs right now, wherever you're located in the United States, Canada, if there's a market rate you need to pay to get a person at a particular level that is appropriate. If you go 50% under market rate and manage to hire someone, what's the quality of that employee going to be? Yeah, they're probably not going to be very good. They might be a nice person. They might put a lot of effort and they might learn, but they're not going to be good at the job because you're paying less than half a market rate. I have a secret for everybody. It works the same way no matter where you are in the world. Yeah. So just because the cost of living is lower and or they can stretch their dollar further where they live doesn't mean that decent quality people magically cost less. So will you pay less to hire a T1, T2, or T3 person in the Philippines? Yes. Are you going to pay dramatically less where that should be your motivation? No. And if that's what you're doing it wrong. Like, these people should cost a little bit less, not a lot of bit less. And I think it is fair to say that if you're hiring somebody, 50% below market rate, a lot of bit less, well, yeah, there's probably a better chance that they're not as skilled. They probably haven't had as much experience because they're not demanding a higher salary. Yeah, there is a higher possibility that person maybe doesn't speak as fluent of English because I bet they're not from an area where they were able to go and get a normal English education, just the exact same way it would work here. It's no different. So your goal here should not be, I want to pay somebody basically a sweatshop wage to work at night for me and sling through tickets. Your goal should be, I want to expand my hours of coverage so I can have an intelligent human monitoring my systems and working tickets at a price that I can afford, but is still reasonable and indicative of the skill set I'm trying to hire. If you approach it that way, you're going to find that you do the final missing piece that will make this successful. So if you approach basically treating this as an actual human employee that you would hire here, they're just not here, you know what's going to happen? You're going to be motivated to try and include your investment in your company. You know what that means? They should have access to things like benefits, and they should be included as an actual member of your team, not your forgotten dirty secret that you keep locked in the basement. And if you approach it that way, as somebody who is a member of your team, who joins meetings, is included, is invited to shenanigans, and you can absolutely accommodate a lot of this stuff remotely, you know what'll happen? That person will feel like they work for a company rather than being some sort of indentured servant. And so they will care a little more, and they will make an effort to participate, and they will make an effort to understand. And when they get to those culture barriers, for example, where they might not be comfortable making a decision, they will be more likely to raise their hand and say, hey, I'm stuck. Can you help me? All the pain points that you typically have will start to go away or lessen if you treat your offshore hires like they are actual people and part of your team. And if you ask anybody in our space, vendor or MSP, who's already doing this, and there are a number that do, we will trip over ourselves to tell you how amazing these types of hires are. They're fantastic. I understand this won't be for everybody. There's some people, due to the industries you serve, this, in Help's case, we are, trying to be able to support certain types of MSPs that have requirements where all the staff do need to be in the continental United States. So I totally get it. Like, offshoring isn't going to fit everybody's business model, and not everyone's going to be able to do it. And there's tons of legitimate reasons that you can't hire or won't hire someone offshore. But anybody who wants to try it, you just got to approach it the right way. And if you do, you really won't regret it. I had a couple of parting tips I just wanted to offer that will make it even a little bit better if you really want to lean into this idea of offshoring. So one of the things that's important is look for having one person in another country is a good start. But if you figure, like, if you just have one employee here, it's hard to establish a sense of culture and belonging with one employee because they have no peers. So this starts to get easier as you acquire more offshore people, especially if they're roughly in the same geography, because at least they, are awake at the same time, can talk to each other, work with each other, you'll reach a point where this starts to become administratively burdensome to manage somebody that's in a 12-hour different time zone than you. So I highly suggest you look and see if wherever you're hiring, in this case, the Philippines, find a local PEO. They absolutely exist. A lot of them are fantastic, and they will take a lot of the administrative overhead completely off the table for you. They'll make sure that you're in compliance with local labor laws, and they'll just in general help you make sure that you're not doing anything locally that would be just as unethical if you were doing it here. And then if you continue growing this model, I suggest that when you get to the point where you have enough offshore presence that you can afford to do so, go hire a proper manager that's in their time zone. Um, it makes a big difference. And so the small MSP, this is probably less practical for you. But as you start to become a bigger MSP, you get more into that like 10, 8, 10, 12, $50 million range. You really should be thinking about it. If you've got like a 3-4 person offshore team, one of those people should really be in a management capacity. And don't be cheap. Like, actually hire a proper manager with the proper help desk managing skill set in that geography with the credentials. Lean on your PEO to help you if you need to. Have that person there to run that team properly with your KPIs, metrics, and goals in their time zone when they're there. It's going to make a lot of things easier for you, and you'll start to be able to offload a lot of admin tasks to this person. Hiring, interviewing, managing PTO, time off, schedules, all of this stuff. You'll have somebody native in their time zone with the proper expertise to be able to run that team, and you'll be happy you did so. If you're kind of in between that, I've hired my first offshore person and I'm not as big as Dean just said to like dedicate an onshore manager, a third option would be look for countries like the Philippines that have a really large expat population. So like Manila is a really great example. There's a lot of United States, Canadian, UK, New Zealand, Australian expats there. And a lot of them are IT workers. Hire one of them. And that's your first offshore hire, and then have them build the team for you. And that can also overcome a lot of these challenges, because then you have somebody who, from a culture standpoint, is much more of a native fit to what you're used to. They'll build a local team over time that they're able to manage. You'll have somebody that you can communicate with and work with. That's another excellent strategy. And there are even vendors that specialize in helping you find those people. So hopefully, having heard all that, I hope if you were considering doing this, you feel a little bit more encouraged to do this the right way. It can really be an incredible move for your MSP. If you don't want to deal with all of that, then remember there are entire companies like Helps that will do all of this for you. It's a little different, and I'll talk about in another video some of what you're giving up and some of what you're gaining by hiring a vendor to fully manage this for you. But sometimes that's more appropriate. You just don't want to deal with it. I understand that. Those vendors exist. A lot of us are pretty good. I hope you all have a fantastic Thursday, and I look forward to hearing about whomever your first international hire is, because that's awesome. Keep slaying MSPs.